Thank you to these companies and organizations that make the Before I Die New Mexico Festival possible. A good goodbye. Gail Rubin puts the fun in funeral planning. Compassion and choices, improving care, expanding options, and empowering everyone to chart their end-of-life journey. Daniel's Family Funerals and Cremations, Fairview Memorial Park, Gabaldon Mortuary, Sandia Memory Gardens, and Vista Verde Memorial Park, all in the Albuquerque area. Estate Pros, offering professional dispersal of personal possessions due to a move, illness, or death. The Final Exit Network, educating about and defending the right to choose at end of life. French Funerals and Cremations and Sunset Memorial Park in Albuquerque. Gathering Us, providing in-person and virtual memorial services and online memorial pages. Keeper, providing hybrid and virtual memorial services and keeping memories alive with online tributes to preserve, celebrate, and share life legacies. Morris Hall, estate planning attorneys in New Mexico and Arizona. Remembering a Life, your guide to honoring a life well lived, from planning a tribute to mourning a loved one. And Retirement Extender, investment management services with a personalized strategy recommendation based on your needs and objectives. Welcome to this session called Healing Hearts, How to Heal Hearts, Grief Recovery for Adults and Children. I am so pleased to bring together to share with you information from Jade Bock, who is the Executive Director of the Children's Grief Center of New Mexico. And she's held this position twice. First for 12 and a half years. Then she was the Community Services Manager for New Mexico Donor Services, and that's all about organ donation. Then she returned to the Children's Grief Center in 2020, and it's now combined with the Grief Resource Center, which addresses grief for adults. Heather Leigh is a grief recovery specialist, and she is also general manager of the Greenhaven Memorial Gardens and Life Tribute Center in Elgin, South Carolina. She's also a certified funeral celebrant, and in addition to being a grief recovery specialist. So with that, ladies, please take it away.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Jana. It is an honor to be here this evening with you. My name is Heather Leigh, and I'm a grief recovery specialist here in Elgin, South Carolina, originally from outside of Pittsburgh, PA. And this evening for you, I'm going to focus on the myths of grief, the life events that may cause grief, and the measures that you can take to help yourself or when you are talking to others. We will take questions at the end, and so let's go ahead and get started. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a psychiatrist and pioneer in near-death studies in 1969. She published On Death and Dying as a result of research of individuals who were diagnosed with terminal illnesses. They were nearing death, and her research spanned several years, and from there she had developed the stages of grief. Unfortunately, the media and other individuals had picked this concept up and applied it to those who were struggling with grief and living. And so while the living may experience anger, depression, or denial, they are not steps to conquer or something to check off and you move into the next stage. For those of us, grief is really a messy hairball. We find that we have ups and downs, we have a lot of challenges, we can become depressed because of it, and we'll go through a couple different things that maybe you are experiencing this or you know somebody who is. So the Grief Recovery Institute was developed after John James had experienced an untimely death of his young son. He sought out the help of therapists, clergy, psychologists, and most of them had started working with him. And he finally said to them, listen, my brain is not broken, my heart is. How do I heal my heart? And that was the question that he began asking and started to develop some theories and also some ideas about how to begin healing the heart. And part of that begins with understanding the events that we go through throughout life that may hinder our ability to move forward. So the two big life events are death and divorce. We may also experience grief over the loss of our health, whether we're moving, getting married. Good things also cause grief. Empty nests. It's great that the kids are moving out. However, now what do we do with our time? How do we feel about that? Are we concerned about them moving out? Maybe our own personal safety and trust has been violated. So for an example, I had a 72-year-old woman who visited with me, and she came to me because her sister had passed away. As we started to dig deeper and go back into the time frame of certain events in her life, we learned that her parents had divorced. She had moved through schools numerous times. She was held at gunpoint as a young teenager. She also was raped. And so all of these elements she never really dealt with. And that's what I like to call that we hold on to a tube of grief or our baggage. And that can be something that starts very early on, from whether a loss of pet, a romantic breakup, loss of trust, a move. All of these elements impact our ability to move forward. What we do end up doing, and what we become very good at, is what we refer to as short-term energy relieving behaviors. We bury our hurt feelings, our grief, our anger, our irritation in behaviors that are not healthy. Now, I want to preference this: in and of themselves, in moderation, they're fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's when we begin to overindulge. We claim the fame for workaholics. I like to work a lot. Or we drown out the world in TV, sex, exercise, food. Again, in moderation, they are not bad. It's when we overindulge. I know personally that, sometimes a pint of ice cream is just what the doctor ordered for the evening if I'm feeling a little blue. If I do that every night, what is that going to do? It's going to impact my health. It's going to impact how I sleep. It's going to impact how I feel. And that is just something that's going to end up snowballing. So it's important to recognize when we're overindulging in something. There is a number one stir. And since I can't see everybody yet, I'll be curious to know if everyone kind of in your head guess what that number one stirb is. And we often joke about it. We kind of make it's okay. And that is retail therapy. Everybody jokes about it. We all participated in one way or another. And what happens after that shiny new object wears off and we get the bill in 30 to 45 days and we look at it? So not only did we not really help ourselves and the shininess wore off after a while, now we got to pay for it. And so that is something that is not really good for individuals to participate in without understanding why they're doing it. Another concept or another issue that happens too is that we'll have individuals who either act out or explode, or they retreat inward and implode. And so that could consist of somebody exploding, yelling, screaming. They assault somebody. They blame everything on everybody else. They have angry outbursts. I was working with a family who recently lost their daughter, and she was 7 years old, and the son happened to be there with us, and he was just a couple years older, and his outbursts were in anger. And what we know and what we've been able to work with him is for him to understand that those outbursts are related back to the irritation of what he's had to go through with his sister's diagnosis and and final burial and what that all meant to him. Imploding is somebody who is going to suffer from depression. Maybe they cut themselves, or they over or underindulge in ice cream or shopping or books. They have incredibly negative feelings. Maybe their conversations are guarded. You never really get to know who they are. And so somebody that may be in that position just kind of might remind you of Eeyore. They just kind of are a little blue all the time. They're really never really happy. Maybe they're, putting on a show for a short period of time. Those both individuals, whether exploding or imploding, it's really important to understand how to communicate with them and get them to open up. Imagine, if you would, one of these individuals, I'm sure everybody knows somebody, that they get to work. Pew Reports has researched the number and the types and the dollars lost in workman's compensation, whether it's been days called off, absenteeism. It has been found that businesses across the United States have lost over $75 billion a year. This is a result of policies that may not provide for paid family leave. Maybe it's only a 3-day in the loss of a spouse or a wife, child or family member. There's just not enough time. And I would like you to consider this particular scenario, which has been reported previously through Pew Reports. A brick mason who had been caring for his wife and his family through her diagnosis of breast cancer. Her health ultimately ends up declining and ending in death. And so for about 1.5 years, he'd been caring for her, plus working, plus managing his home, plus managing the kids. The death has occurred, the funeral's over with, and he has a limited amount of time, and he's expected to go back to work and pretend that basically nothing has happened. He is really at a loss at this moment with his kids, the overwhelming medical bills, the cost of his wife's funeral and the burial. Maybe before he would indulge in a couple beers, now he's downing about 12 beers a night. He shows up at work irritated, tired, angry, disappointed, nowhere to turn for help, or limited places for help. And oftentimes, too, ego gets in the way of us asking for help. All of that is a disaster when you are in fields that you have to be aware of your surroundings. And so it's really challenging when we're experiencing that and then have to maintain our daily life and go back to work. A lot of this has also been exposed through COVID. The one thing that COVID has done is it has really taken away our opportunity for our indulgences or our outs or a way to recharge. And so this is a situation where it's important to be able to get this individual the proper help. Women, we are not immune to this at all. And I know plenty of women who take their noon wine very seriously, and that's a coping mechanism for them. And so it's important, if you're a friend or a family member of somebody who is experiencing that, is to be aware of it so that you can offer some assistance. And that assistance, there's good ways and bad ways to be of help. Often within 72 hours of a situation, whether it's a divorce, a death, a move, a separation, a wedding, birth of a child, oftentimes well-meaning individuals say a lot of things that are unhelpful. So the grief recovery method had done a couple calculations and said that within 72 hours, there are 141 comments that a grieving individual may hear. And that could be time heals all wounds. Oh, don't grieve alone. Be strong for others. Don't feel bad. It's all good. Replace the loss. We'll run out and get a new puppy if your dog has died. And it's important to stay busy. As long as you stay busy, your mind won't wander and you won't think about and reflect upon those issues. So out of all of those 122 unhelpful and destructive and dismissive comments, there are only 19 that were really helpful. And some of those are, and what you can do is don't be afraid to show up. Your presence is one of the most valuable things that you can provide to anyone when they are going through a hard time. And really in life in general, this is a very true expression. Showing up is half the battle. However, if you show up, don't be judgmental. Don't offer a lot of information. Be there. Be there for that individual. Listen more, talk less. One of the things we talk about is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So we should be listening a whole lot more than we are talking. It is not our job or our responsibility to fix that person. And we can become a better friend by helping physically to just be there. The other big thing that happens too is compare leads to despair. Every loss is very important to the person who experienced it. And I have this little story, and I'm going to share it with you now instead of it a little bit later. I was doing a hospice training and asked somebody if they had lost their grandmother. And the young lady said that she did. And she said that she's able to help friends and family out because she understands what it's like to lose somebody, to lose a grandma. And I said, really? I said, well, tell me about your grandmama. And she's just all full of love and laughter and loved to cook. And she was always there for us grandkids. And it just really hurt badly when she died. I said, okay. I said, well, let me tell you about my battle axe grandmama. The one that would snatch us up by the hair if we did whatever, or we had to sit down at dinner and enjoy it and keep quiet, or run out and grab a switch. So when she passed away, there was a tremendous amount of relief, and we're okay with that. So you cannot compare your situation to somebody else's situation. Those relationships are so incredibly unique. There is not another one on the face of earth like it. So do not compare. All feelings are valuable. We don't get to choose which feelings we numb, because what we numb, we reduce in joy. We need to go through the sorrow. And when we do, we can experience joy more frequently and in a healthy way. And then ask permission. Grievers often need someone to listen, not give advice or hear a story. And it's also important that you ask if they would like to have a hug. Do not reach out and touch them or tap them on the arm or shoulder or knee when they're sharing their emotions, because that stops the brain. It stops the flow of information coming from them. Be quiet and let them go, and be okay with silence. Silence is okay. If you feel inclined to give advice, ask permission first. Do you want my opinion? May I offer you a suggestion? And then respect their decision. Grief is part of being human. It comes from loss of any kind. And we've already talked about, marriage, transitions, loss of health. The more we allow it to be okay for people to feel the range of human emotions, the more easily we can move through them and smile. People just want to be loved and accepted. The more we can love and accept people where they are, the more their inner light shines. And give people the benefit of the doubt. Your life is much better when you do. By offering compassion to strangers, friends, and families, you will likely experience more joy, love, and peace in all of your interactions. We never could know what is going on under somebody who says, I'm fine. And if we did, we would always be nicer to people if we really knew what they were going through. And the last couple things If you can change your vocabulary, what I ask you to do is to take the words "at least" out. At least is so diminishing. For an example, if a family has lost a child or a pregnancy, there have been a number of people who would go and say, "Oh, isn't it good that you're young? At least you can have more children." How incredibly dismissive is that to the parent who is grieving the hope and the dreams of that child that they lost? The other one is, "At least they are not suffering anymore." This implies that your loved one is not suffering, therefore you should not. How many people are not suffering when a loved one has passed on? You are, and we all are. And in order to help pick you up and lift you, that is not something that we should ever say. And some other ones, God needed another daisy. Oh, I'm jumping ahead. Hold on. The last one, but, diminishes everything you say up to that word. I'm sorry for your loss, but God has a plan. And I know everybody listening has been the subject of a but sentence or a but conversation. It's not comfortable. It's not helpful. I encourage you to exchange the word but for and. And forces the speaker to rethink that sentence. And it also gives the individual listening an opportunity to relax and not know that the carpet's going to be pulled out underneath of them by saying the word but. So God will only give you what you can handle. Many people are angry with God at the time of a loss, of a death, of a change, of a life event. And it is not up to us to define to them why they should or should not be angry. It is okay that they are. God is larger than any of us, and someone being angry with him is fine. This is not a reflection of their faith, and do not try to convince the griever otherwise. I was counseling a young lady whose husband had died unexpectedly, and her church really had kind of left her out in the cold a little bit and really didn't do much for her to help lift her spirits. And they had a slide presentation, and her husband happened to be in that slide presentation, and nobody even asked for her permission. Imagine, if you would, that you're sitting there and you're so angry that this man that you love was taken away from you. And now the people that are supposed to be showering you with love and care just are not there for you. So please never lecture somebody about their faith and where they are with that. And then the other one is, I know how you feel. Again, those relationships are so incredibly unique. Please toss that out. Don't even let that into your brain space. That is not something that we should be saying for anybody. So now I have a question for you. How many of you have experienced a flat tire? I've had a flat tire, and boy, I was not happy about it. When I got out, I didn't look at the tire and say, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to hold on and wait for you to fill back up and repair yourself, and we're going to get back on the road." Grief is the exact same way. You cannot stand there or sit there and not do anything. It requires action. When you had a flat tire, I bet you called somebody to help, or you found the tire iron and you were able to change it yourself, or you called AAA, or you called a friend. This is the exact same thing when you are going through the experience of grief. It is important that you take action, and it's not going to be painful, or it may be painful. You're going to get through that when you find the right individuals that can lead you in the right direction. And when we do that, we find that love, in the process of learning and experiencing our grief and working through our grief, love is the product of a truthful communication, and it is a way that you can be a light on somebody else's journey. And I look forward to anybody that has questions afterwards.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Heather. And we are going to go right over to Hear from Jade Richardson Bock about children's grief.
Thank you, Gail. Hi, everybody.
Hello, Jade, good to see you.
Good to see everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my little PowerPoint now. So building on what Heather said, I'm going to talk a little bit more about children. I come from a program that has been serving bereaved kids for 20 years. This is our 20th anniversary. And there are programs like this all over the country. And if you want to learn more, or if you want to find out if there is a children's grief center type program where you live, check out our website for more resources. The 6-year-old really summed it up. He said, when someone dies, you come here and it helps you. The vast majority of the young people who come to our program do so after the death of a parent, and most of those kids have lost a father. And that is, but there are kids in our program who've experienced every sort of significant death. And like Heather was saying, we don't make assumptions about what is a significant death for a child. If they say they're grieving and if they say they need help, we are here for them. So children do grieve. Their grief looks different than adult grief. Alan Wolfelt, who is super famous in the grief and loss world, he runs a program in Fort Collins, Colorado called the Center for Loss and Life Transition. He said any child old enough to love is old enough to grieve. And so our program starts with young people at age 5, because that's really when we're able to help them in a support group setting. But if a young person is old enough to form an attachment, they're old enough to recognize when that attachment is broken. And that can really start as an infant. Just like for adults, for children, grief is a physical experience as well as emotional, as well as cognitive. You know, Heather was talking about how it affects your brain and your heart. For young people, they often don't have the vocabulary to say, I'm feeling very hypervigilant today and math class was challenging. But they do say to us, my throat hurts and my chest hurts. It's hard to breathe. It feels like there's an elephant sitting on my chest. My tummy hurts. They have more earaches, more illnesses in general. Everybody's immune system is compromised after the stress of a death of a loved one, particularly a death in the household. And kids are more likely to talk about how it feels in their body. They're more likely to miss school days and spend more time in the nurse's office after the death of a loved one than they would have before that time. So just as Heather mentioned, Kubler-Ross and the stages of grief, there's lots of models out there, but the one that really resonates with our side of the fence in children's grief world, the one that is championed across grief centers around the country and around the world, was formed by Dr. William H. Worden and his colleague, Phyllis Silverman, in what was known as the Harvard Childhood Bereavement Project, which was done in the 80s. And the tasks of a child after a death starts with to accept the reality of the loss. And that doesn't mean that they need to accept it as if it were acceptable, because of course it's not. We know that. But to accept the reality of the loss means to understand what happened, to understand the difference between alive and dead, to understand that our loved one cannot come back, that their body doesn't feel anymore, they don't think anymore. Very young children may be running around a funeral acting like everything's fine. It's because they don't understand what's happening. They may attend a burial, and then weeks later, if a storm comes in, they will wake up their guardians panicked that their loved one is getting wet or is cold or is afraid of the dark, because they don't understand. So helping young people understand the difference between alive and dead is really how we can start to support that first task to accept the reality of the loss. Of course, once we understand what death is, it starts to hurt. And so the second task is to work through the pain of the grief. And this really means feeling all the feelings that come along with the loss of a loved one. And those can be very complicated, as Heather described as well, describing the two different relationships that people had with their grandmother. Feeling all the feelings is complicated. It can take as long as it takes. And often, I would say always, people in the same family are at a different pace and at a different place with their feelings. So making a welcoming spot and letting everybody know that all feelings are okay is important. The third task of a grieving child is to adjust to an environment in which the deceased is missing. And the way that we do that is we follow the map that our culture makes for us. And so this Before I Die festival is a wonderful example of the rituals and the activities that we can engage in as mourners. You can include children in helping to, choose a coffin, choose an urn, explaining what cremation is, participating in rosaries and Dia de los Muertos and Kaddish and sitting Shiva, in all the different ways that all of our different cultures have to honor our loved one after they have passed. That helps with this third task. It's about commemorating and memorializing that person. That helps us to adjust to that environment and to understand they were alive, now they are not alive, and this is what that looks like in my family. The fourth task of a grieving child is the biggie. It's a big one, to find an enduring connection with the deceased while still embarking on a new life. Really, this is about reinvesting in life. This is about understanding that even though this loss happened in my family, even though this person that I loved is no longer here, even though life is not the way I wanted it to be or the way I thought it would be, that I can go forward and I can form new attachments completely. And I can trust that no matter if that attachment lasts or if that attachment also ends, that I will be okay. So reinvesting in life is huge. And how long does that take? Well, it takes as long as it takes. And for every individual and every family, that's going to be different. But that is really the ultimate goal that we're kind of working towards when we provide bereaved children and families with support, with information, and with an environment in which to process what the heck is going on in their family after a loved one dies. So how do we talk about death to a child? A lot of us have absolutely no idea, and that's okay. There is no chapter in What to Expect When You're Expecting on how to tell your kiddo that their daddy is no longer coming home. It's a very difficult conversation, and I think that a lot of the stumbling blocks that we have as humans, as people who love other people and people who love the children in our lives, is that we want to protect them and we want to keep them safe. And so we use euphemisms, or we rush right to what we think is the good part of the story. We might say they've passed away, or they've gone to a better place, or they are with the Lord now, or God needed another angel. All the things that we say to try and help it not hurt so much can actually hinder that very first task, right? That task of understanding. So we need to be able to communicate accurate, factual information. We need to use words like dead and died. We need to let kids know that all feelings are okay. And one of the most important things that we can say early in the conversation, and often, you get to revisit this conversation as children move through new developmental stages and they have different questions and different understandings about the loss. So that's a lot, a lot of do-overs that these kids give you. you need to explicitly let them know that there is nothing that they did, there's nothing that they thought that caused their loved one to die. Kids are very creative, they're magical thinkers, and they also are pretty sure the whole world revolves around them. I've heard kids in my program say things like, if I had gotten better grades, then my dad wouldn't have died of that heart attack. They're trying to find a way, like we all do, to explain the unexplainable and to control things that are out of our control. So telling them early and often, this is not your fault, there is nothing that you could have done, is very, very helpful and helps to kind of prevent some of those harmful stories from forming. So Heather talks a lot about, all the different ways that adult grief can manifest. And again, it's a little different in children, and it depends also on how old they are and other factors in their lives. But their grief is more like a cloud passing over the sun, whereas adults don't get a break from their grief. Adults don't forget what happened. They don't get absorbed in play or different activities. They have a continual awareness of the loss. Their understanding, a child's understanding of death is limited to their age and their cognitive development. It's also limited to what the adults in their lives tell them. They have limited memories of the deceased. They may often not have a single memory of life before the person who died was in their lives. Whereas adults may have that. They may remember a life, their life, and have an identity formed from before the person who died came into their lives. Children will talk openly about death all the time. They'll ask questions. They'll tell cashiers at the store, in graphic detail how their loved one died. And that can be hard for adults to hear, but it's not weird. It's totally normal. It's where kids are, and it's what's on their mind. And they will re-experience different aspects of grief as they mature and they grow and develop. And that can be super hard for grown-ups. Say it's been 5 years since the loved one died, and the grown-up feels like everybody's doing okay, and all of a sudden the young person is back in a funk and saying things like, my life would be so much better if my dad were here. Somebody would be here to help me, with my soccer practice or my English homework or whatever it is. And that can be really challenging for adults who think, oh, I thought we worked through this. Is this a regression? Is this a concern? No, it's just that they're understanding the death and how it relates to them differently. And so they're grieving again a little bit, and that's okay. Mr. Rogers, one of my heroes, he said, anything that's mentionable is manageable. And we can really show that to our young people by speaking openly and honestly about how their loved one died and what it's like for us as well. So sometimes kids don't want anybody at school to know what happened. They say things like, I just want one place where things are normal. I just want one place where people don't treat me like I'm different and they don't ask me questions about what happened. So please, 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 please don't tell anybody at school. Now, I've seen it go both ways. I have seen it where guardians have honored that young person's wishes, and I understand this child has been through so much. It's been so unfair already. We do not want to disappoint them again by going against their wishes. So we're just not going to tell anybody at school that their mother died. Well, that can backfire in a lot of ways. There's a lot of events at school that are intertwined around parents, muffins for mom, Mother's Day, things like that. And if the school staff don't know what's going on with the young person, they're not going to be able to make accommodations for them. They're not going to help them work through that. So no matter what the kid says, as the guardian, you have to do the hard thing, and you have to make an appointment with each child's school counselor and tell them what happened and have a conversation with them about how they can support you and your kid. And there's a ton of information about how the grief of a student can impact their academic experience as well as their social and emotional experience. There's a lot of information out there for schools too on how to become grief sensitive schools. As Heather described, there's a lot of symptoms, if you will. There's a lot of feelings that you feel after the death of a loved one, and a lot of different ways to cope with that pain. Some are healthier than others, but grief is a big word for a very complicated collection of feelings. And almost all of it is normal. Naming all your stuffed animals after the person who died. I've seen it, you know, becoming really attached to a physical item like a flannel shirt, you know, and sleeping with it every night. I wouldn't set off any alarms about that. But there are some times when you do want to bring in extra help. And that's if your child regularly, continuously lies or denies the person died, refuses to speak about the person, and can get real dramatic and destructive if other people try to talk about them, like setting fires, knocking over furniture, that kind of thing. Displays aggression that becomes destructive and doesn't subside. Any self-harm or punishing behaviors, and increased risk-taking behaviors. This is more likely to be seen in teenagers who may feel it doesn't matter if I die because then I get to be with my person who died, or it doesn't matter what I do because we all die anyway. But when those risk-taking behaviors get really dangerous, it's okay to put boundaries in place and to get extra help. Grieving kids need boundaries just like non-grieving kids. Heather did a beautiful little piece on what to say and what not to say. I have a few slides on that as well. And this is all things that were collected out of years of grief group, particularly with my middles and tweens. So these are people between the ages of 10 and 13. You know, what did somebody say to you that was not helpful? And what did people say to you that was helpful? Well, if you look at this list, you may see things that you have said, and that's okay. Like Maya Angelou says, when we know better, we do better. And these are often things that we were trained to say to families and children after a death. There's a lot of them. We both have at least on here. Brene Brown has a quote in her empathy versus sympathy video, which is only a couple minutes long and it's on YouTube. I recommend it. It's really cute. And it's something that we show a lot in our kid groups as well to start a conversation. But she says in that video, no helpful statement ever started with the words "at least." Then finally, here's some examples of things that might be helpful to say. Young people report that specific memories and stories about their person are just so wonderful to hear. It helps them paint a richer picture of who that person was outside of their family stories. And it helps them understand more about themselves too, and where they came from and where they might have gotten some of their traits. And as Heather said as well, silence is okay. There is no perfect thing to say. If there was, this whole presentation would have been a lot shorter, right? It'd have been one slide long and we'd be done. But your physical presence, gentle contact, them knowing that you are there for them, that's really huge. Here's a list of things that are helpful to ask young people who might not be so super open to talking about what's going on with them. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. Most of these are open-ended questions, and some are really specific too. Like, what could you use help with today, right now? It's also okay to ask, how are you doing today, right now? Developing a scale, you know, 1 is absolutely rotten pants miserable, and 10 is the best day of your life, and is a good shorthand for communicating with kids too. So when Dr. Pierce and I collaborated on writing the book, Parenting Through Grief, one thing that I really wanted to have in there was permission for parents to take care of themselves. It's just so impossible, right? Raising kids is always really hard. Raising kids by yourself while you're grieving the death of somebody important to you is just, it feels insurmountable. And I've done enough grief groups with parents in that position over the years to know that they're more likely to punish themselves than to help themselves. So if you know a person who is an adult in a grieving family and they're trying to hold it together for everybody else, giving them the permission and the space to take care of themselves and to help them develop a plan to replenish can be really helpful. So we wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. So I'm almost done with my little bit of information that I wanted to share here. And I hope that you guys do have some questions for Heather and I. But I just want to remind all of us that even though the death of a loved one in childhood is a very challenging event, in fact, it's on the list of ACEs, or adverse childhood events, that indicate a lot of trouble down the road. And there's a lot of troubling statistics about adults who've experienced death as children and how that impacted the rest of their lives. I want you to know that that's not the only story, and that's not the end of the story. The possibility for long-term success after a death in the family is really high, especially with getting the support that we talked about. Less fear-based decision-making, having an others focus, like a sense of giving back and contributing, building resilience through experience, demonstrating the ability to cope and being able to look back and say, you know, I made it through this bad experience. I will probably be able to make it through this one. Creating connections within our communities. And sometimes for young people, that is identifying folks who can help them with really specific things now that their loved one has died. These coping skills and techniques can help them throughout their lives. So we need to embrace, support grieving children and families, not hide from them and not try to soothe them with short-term platitudes. And we will get to what long-term success can look like. So that's what I wanted to share with you guys today. And now we have some time for Q&A.
Yes, we do. If you're online, we welcome your questions. You can type it in the chat or raise your hand and we can recognize you. Anybody in the room have questions? We've been working on our personal altars while you've been talking, although I have to say you guys have actually attracted all the attention, and maybe we didn't get as much work done on the altars as we would like to have done. But there are questions that I would like to ask if nobody else wants to jump right in. So Heather, how did you get involved with the Grief Recovery Specialist Program? And what would you say is the most valuable lesson you've taken from that training?
So the Grief Recovery Institute is in Colorado now, and I actually became interested in grief way back when I was a young teenager, older teenager in church. And what spurred me to take it a little more seriously was a group of individuals we were meeting on how to handle grief within the church. And somebody in our prayer group had her son was in a horrific accident, and she actually closed out our meeting with a prayer that she hoped that he would die because it was going to be hard for her to handle his life and how well could he cope in life as a paraplegic, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, whoa, hold up here. We need to really work on this. That has stuck with me. The Grief Recovery Institute really talks about the heart, healing the heart. We all know it has to do with the heart. All of us have competent brains. And as Jade had pointed out, and we've been socialized to say certain things and respond in certain ways, and we have to undo that. And so that's what the Grief Recovery Institute has done. And you can either work with somebody or you can do it alone. And the Grief Recovery Method is available on Amazon or at our website.
How did you get involved with Children's Grief, the Children's Grief Center?
I was managing a bar and bartending, and I read a call for volunteers that were needed at this place called the Children's Grief Center. And I had never heard those two words put together. And I called and got information and took the training. And I was a college graduate. I was the general manager of the bar. So, it was like a career thing. I was a mother with two children, and I had never heard of that kind of work before. And it was compelling to me because I was a teenager whose father was killed in an accident at work. And from a business perspective, the moment I, sat down in groups and I saw the support that was given and the healing that occurred for the cost of pizza and crayons, I was completely hooked, completely hooked.
I'm thinking of what I'm going to present tonight as part of Not Planning to Die with the Kaminsky Method. Which,
yes.
It's great. You should join me tonight online for that. But there is a scene where the unpredictable nature of grief is very vividly illustrated when a man goes to pick up his dry cleaning and a fancy evening dress of his wife, who had just died from cancer after a long illness, and the dry cleaner puts it on the hook and says, "This was here a long time." And he looks at it, and it sends him into
a grief burst.
A grief fit. And talk a little bit about the unpredictable nature of grief, and things set us off.
Yeah, I'll start with that. But Heather, I know you'll have some good things to share from the Grief Recovery Institute. They're normal. So my favorite working definition of a trigger right now, and of course things evolve and change, and I've been working in this field now almost 20 years, so I've seen some things change. But a trigger, the feeling that you feel when you see your loved one's favorite cereal on sale at the grocery store, and you go to buy it, and then you remember they're dead, and then you fall apart in the grocery store, and you leave and you don't have any groceries. My favorite working definition right now is that a trigger is just a place where there's more healing to be done. And they come at us, they're unpredictable and unexpected, they're painful. They can make people feel really bad, though. They can make people feel like they're failures, like they're losing their mind, like they're not okay. And I think it's important for all of us to remember that it's totally okay, to fall apart in the grocery store on occasion. Heather, what would you say about grief bursts and triggers and coping with those things?
Oh, 100%. I mean, to be expected at any moment. You're doing dishes and all of a sudden you break down, you're driving along, a song comes on the radio. My grandfather passed away probably 15 years ago, and I don't remember the exact situation, but I was like, oh man, I got to call Grandpap and let him know. And I'm like, wait a minute, Heather. Dag nabbit, I can't share this with him, and so over time, when we begin to process and go through that grief journey, we begin to hold on to those positive memories and share more of that, and they become happy tears, or that they are recognizing the fact that it is okay to cry, it's okay to be upset, it is okay to acknowledge those feelings. And that's the important part, is acknowledging those feelings instead of trying to stuff them down, because they're going to throw up on you some point in time when you least expect it.
One question. I can take one question from the room.
Is there any training for teachers about either dealing with a kid in their classroom, aside from the counselors, but for the teachers, and or for teachers when we've had these kind of shooting incidents that are very, incredibly painful.
So this is probably better for Jade. Is there training for teachers?
Yes.
Aside from the counselors that a school might have?
Oh, is there ever? So there is a program called the Grief Sensitive Schools Initiative. This is funded by New York Life. I can get you connected to it. And my contact information and the information of our program has, as well as some of my favorite resources, has been shared in the chat. But Gail, you know me, you know how to find the Children's Grief Center. Please share it in the room if necessary. And the Grief Sensitive Schools Initiative provides $500 in funding for every school, as well as wonderful modules, videos and print material online for elementary, middle, and high school levels, how to respond to grief in the classroom, how to respond to a death in the school, how to respond to tragic events in the school. And I'm happy to help you get connected with that. In addition, I do a training. It's called Supporting Grieving Students. It can be an hour or 2 hours long. And there's more information about that on our website. And I do know that APS has contracted me for a training in January, but I don't know who's going to that. So yeah, there's loads of information. I'd love to help you get connected to it.
Good. And your website is childrensgrief.org?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So people can find out about that there. All right. Well, Heather Leigh, Jade Bock, Richardson, thank you so much for an awesome presentation. This wraps up this virtual and in-person session.